Out of the top 10 countries, 3 countries in the top 20, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. I just came to the realization that maybe the best way to export Bitcoin is through Blackrock ETFs in regions that are not the US.
The IMF basically came in and gave El Salvador a $1.4 billion loan. And in the loan agreement, they stipulated that El Salvador had to do 3 key things. 1, people could no longer pay taxes in crypto. 2, they either had to sell or wind down the Chivo wallet. And the third point is that they could no longer force businesses to accept cryptos.
Great, so we're live, another episode of Frontera, here in this program where we do a recap of what happened in Latin America in crypto this week. I'm Ab, co-founder and CEO of Bando, and I'm here with my good friend Kush. Kush, how's everything, man?
What's up, Ab? Super happy to be here with you, man. Missed recording live with you, but you know, I'm glad despite the holidays we're still here. We got a lot of news to run through as well, and we want to make this a short and sweet one. So let's get into it.
Yeah, perfect. And just to begin, how was the final stop of the Mantle Rockstar tour in Mexico? What are your final impressions?
It was great, man. It was a really, really fun trip. We got the opportunity to go to 4 different countries over the course of 10 days. And yeah, I think just so many lessons that you know, we've shared with the Mantle team, and really excited. I did a whole recap on Twitter of the differences and recap of each of the different cities we went to. And, you know, the TLDR summary is each country is different. Each one has different concentrations of builders and different communities. And again, I think with the rumors of DevConnect happening in Latin America this year, or next year in 2025, we'll see a lot of builder energy and engagement. So I'm excited to see that all come to Latin America, and should be an awesome year.
Yeah, amazing, perfect. And we're recording this on the Boxing Day, 26th of December, and we were just doing a little recap of the cultural differences in Latin America. In Latin America, the most important day is the 24th. Well, people get together, they dine, they wine, they celebrate. And a lot of families in the 25th, for example, I just hang out with my wife and didn't do much. But I think that in other places around the world, the 25th of December is the important day. And with your UK roots, what's the Boxing Day? I've never got it. I only know that there's a lot of Premier League football that day.
Yeah, so Boxing Day was originally conceived as the day where you would go and donate to those in need after Christmas, right? So the idea is you just got all these gifts, and now you're going to go and donate to people in need. The really ironic thing is just typical human living in accelerated capitalism. Now Boxing Day is the day that you go and buy things, sort of like a Black Friday. So just ironic how we went from the day you give to charity to the day that you now go out and just buy more things.
Yeah. I think that classical thing that happened in the 20th century, right? With abundance of resources, it's time to buy instead of giving. And man, let's deep dive into what happened this week in crypto in Latin America. And the first news that we want to analyze is you brought this up that I found really interesting. So we are analyzing the difference between the Chainalysis report on crypto adoption, that basically the most important data point that we are analyzing are total inflows, crypto inflows in Latin America. Out of the top 10 countries, there are 3 countries in the top 20. Those are Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. So as we know, crypto in Latin America is really important because of the economic situation, and we have several countries in the top 20. And analyzing that versus the developer report of Electric Capital, where South America is the 5th continent, just in front of Oceania, with developers. So there's a big gap between the need for crypto, the demand, and the builder capacity in this region. That I'd love to get your takes there on what's the opportunity here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic take is that Latin America is a region that benefits a lot from crypto, right? And we have seen some really awesome teams come out of the region. We've talked about them before, right? So whether that's Maker, a lot of the core development for Aave, for example, happened in Argentina, Open Zeppelin, and so forth. However, despite us having a really strong need for crypto and despite us using crypto substantially, the problem is a lot of these technologies are not being developed in the region. So what does that mean? Is we're not actually, the end users are not actually the ones who are developing the products that we fundamentally need, right? So I think there's just a massive opportunity. It's a lot of our work with Odyssey as well, is saying, okay, how do we foster more developers in the region so that Latin America is not penultimate to just Oceania in the developer report, right? Keep in mind, this is like self-reported, and so the data may not be like entirely accurate and it's not fully representative, but it's just like a general indicator that, hey, Latin Americans are using crypto a ton, but we're not developing crypto a lot, right? And the true value capture and the engagement of value and development of value happens when you're actually producing technology and not just being passive users of it. So I think that's super important. And again, I'm super excited to see us continue to do this. One notable thing that I did see is in North America in the developer report, Base is the most used smart contract platform, whereas in South America, Polygon and much of the general majority or global majority, global South, Polygon was actually that chain. So I found that to be really fascinating, particularly given that Polygon seems to be, the discourse around Polygon is not one that's very optimistic, but just seeing that difference between like Base being very widely adopted in North America and in South America, Polygon really being that leader. And I know they put a lot of energy and resources into looking to lead in Latin America, specifically on the institutional front. But I'm curious, like your takes on developers in the region. How do we close the delta as well so that we get more people from Latin America actually building on smart contract platforms? And then also like on the blockchain front, like which blockchains are you seeing really do super well when it comes to developer engagement?
Yeah, I think that one data point that is really exciting to see is the evolution of crypto like developers from 2015 to 2024. Back in 2015, South America only got 2% of the total developers, and right now South America has 5%. So we grew a lot. When we see this chart that we're showing on screen, you need to go to our YouTube and subscribe to our newsletter. There we put all of this. That's the announcement. So back in 2015, in North America, 43% of the developer activity happened in North America, and now it's 24%. So I think that there are a lot of interesting takes there because it's been, as we all know, during the recent years, really hard to build stuff in the US because of the regulatory attack. And it's really exciting to see South America ramping up in the number of devs. And there's a couple of interesting things on the questions that you were asking, Kush. Regarding the different ecosystems, I see Base super strong, and you've got a lot to do there with Base Latam and everything that Odyssey did with the Base team. And also I think that specifically in Mexico has a culture that's really embedded to the US, as we're really close. So we share a lot of I don't know, like different ways of acting. And also in Mexico, we have this cultural bias that everything that was built in the US is good, right? So, for example, we might be one of the few countries in Latin America that use more USDC than USDT. And that's an anomaly. And maybe that's because of the cultural heritage and the cultural match between the US and Mexico. So obviously Base has a lot of traction here. I see a lot of devs building stuff on Base. Also, there's an interesting effect that there are people that are not born and raised in Latin America that are building for Latin America. And I see that that's gonna keep happening a lot. The other day I was talking with a good friend, like a good VC, that they have one of the most important VCs in Mexico, and he told me the same, that there are a lot of people from the US and Europe coming to Mexico to build. And I think that that's a big opportunity for Mexican founders because the market has a lot of needs, but we are not that entrepreneur. Just look at DollarUp. There are 2 Spanish founders and an American founder. Or the guys at Tetherfuse. They are building the tokenized bond, like the T-bill of Mexico on top of Solana, and they are an American team. So I think that that's going to keep happening. And I think that's good because this type of teams enable good products, enable good product teams, and good product teams enable good founders. For example, now, the team at Bando that we are founding this spending protocol, we came out of Bitso. And without the Bitso, our experience in Bitso, we could not done this, right? So that's my take. I think that it's just a matter of maybe a couple of 5 years, 10 years, that we start seeing more and more Latin American founders because the industry needs to mature, like being really honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. I hope that like this influx of foreign builders coming into Latin America just like puts a fire under the ass of Latin American builders. Because again, it's like one of the big things that we see, and again, we run this accelerator program, we have incubation programs, like technical educational programs as well, obviously, and it's like one of the biggest complaints from ventures that we see, and this is from VCs, from like people that are looking to work with these teams. It's like people from Latin America need to dream bigger, right? And it's really hard to dream bigger if you've never seen the world and you haven't seen what Venmo looks like or what financial rails in like Europe or North America look like, right? And you can't sort of like dream past your current like state. And so I think that that's super important for builders from Latin America. It's like, hey, get educated on like what the global standard looks like, right? So tokenized T-bills, for example, like Ondo, it's like, hey, what would this look like in Mexico? Huh, really interesting. Turns out like T-bills in Mexico pay really high interest rates and people want to get access to these, right? So just being able to like get that exposure, I think is super important, and being able to just like scale up your thought process and capacity to think past your national bubble, I think is crucial for a lot of these builders. So anyways, I'm super bullish. I think it's notable that the global share of developers, specifically in America, dropped substantially. It 3x in Africa since 2015. It's 2x in Latin America. Africa's doing awesome work on builder onboarding, to be honest. I've absolutely loved seeing that. And then Asia is the true winner here, right? And so it's like we have so much to learn from Asia as far as how do we bring more crypto to Latin America. You mentioned that you were speaking with some Mexican VCs here. I want to do like a bit of a double click on that point because one of the big complaints that I get from a lot of folks is that there aren't really solid, qualified, well queued in venture investors in crypto in Latin America. Like I there's like one firm that comes to mind, and then there's like one firm that focuses specifically on crypto. That's Repo Ventures. They do a bunch of global deals. They also do some work in Latin America, and one other firm as well. But other than that, there's like two firms that immediately come to mind. But I'm curious to get your take on like as you've been fundraising for Bando and so forth, like what have those conversations been like with venture investors? Because I actually think that's like another really interesting opportunity to start activating like more capital and start backing founders in the region as well.
Yeah, so in my experience talking with VCs in Latin America, most of them don't understand crypto, and most of them, I think that the worst point or the worst place to be for a VC is not understanding something and pretending that they understand something. So, and I talked with a lot of those type of VCs in the past year, and I came across a couple that were really interesting. One firm that they are really solid in Mexico. Since the first meeting, they told me, we do not understand crypto. We are not gonna pretend that we do, and we're evaluating you as a founder. And I found that really compelling because they are being absolutely transparent and they were not arrogant, trying to fit a narrative that they do not understand. And the other two, for us it was important to have a VC, like a local VC. We're building globally. We're building a payments protocol for the world. But having someone in your region, it's like a local validation of, okay, these guys come out of Mexico and they have a reputable VC backing them. So we have 99 startups. And I think that specific approach with 99 startups is different because the managing partner, Alex, he personally likes and understands crypto. But it's basically like a growing VC, right? So I think that's the main point. Specific VCs invest in crypto out of either FOMO or personal interest of a managing partner, and most of local VCs do not get it. So that's why we feel a lot more comfortable talking with global crypto VCs because They specifically talk our language. They know what we're talking about. And when we talk about a global payments protocol, it clicks them a lot faster. What's your experience? When you talked with local VCs, what's your take?
Honestly, they're completely clueless, right? And so I think, again, there's just a lot of value that's being left on the table there. I think generally in Latin America, there's like a big kind of problem with the venture landscape. Again, I think we've talked about this before in one of the earlier episodes, but the premise here is like a lot of this venture funding comes directly from very old school family money, and that money isn't generally very risk prone, right? And so they want to allocate towards like commodities and very simple, just like asset classes, and they're leaving a ton of value on the table. So again, just another opportunity that we're also going to be exploring at Odyssey, and something that I think is another great sort of area for people to start thinking about as well. I know, the other really interesting like data point is I speak with a lot of global venture investors. They're constantly asking for exposure to Latin America, and it's like, okay, cool, like we'll help you sort of do that, and that's been really fun as well. It's like we just got to surface these kick-ass teams.
Amazing. Let's keep moving to the next piece of news. Data came up, and Bitso Business processed $12 billion in 2024, and Bitso is managing 10% of the remittances between the US and Mexico. These are $4.5 billion. As we've mentioned several times, the corridor between Mexico and the US is huge, is around $65 billion. So what's your take here? Why is Bitso Business going so good?
This is like 10% of remittances being processed by Bitso is just like absolutely mental, right? $12 billion worth of value. What's happening in Mexico specifically is that Bitso has pretty much cornered the market. There's sort of a number of reasons they've been able to do that. They were first movers. They've got a lot of regulatory support on their side and so forth. We've spoken about this in our last episode, but basically I think it just like opens up the doors for people to start thinking creatively. Like, there is a huge opportunity here. Our prediction is that in the next 5 years, we'll see 50% of remittances flow on crypto rails, and I think stablecoins will play just a huge role in that. I think whether that be USDC or other stablecoin issuers that are perhaps focused specifically on the region, this is just going to be absolutely massive. And props to Bitso, man. I mean, listen, they've pulled the winning strategy, and you're the one that used to work there, right? So, like, I'm curious, what do you think has allowed Bitso to get to a place where they're able to process like 10% of remittances? Because that's unheard of across the continent.
Yeah, I think that one of the key aspects, one of the common sayings at Bitso when I was there was that liquidity begets liquidity. And I think that if you tell that to a regular person, they are not going to understand it. But at Bitso, they managed to create this flywheel where they create a lot of liquidity from different sources, from businesses, from remittances, and from retail. And basically that liquidity brings more liquidity because they are the only corridor between Mexican peso, or they are the most important corridor between the Mexican peso and USDC. And that's huge. There are several new players coming that they are connecting directly to Circle. So that competition is going to get really, really, really interesting. And the connection between B2B rails is going to be it's already a red ocean, and it's going to get a lot more aggressive on 2025 because Circle, I think it's a key player that it's not mentioned a lot, but it's going to start being really big with different global partnerships. For example, the one that they had with Binance and USDC. And I see that they're going to have similar partnerships across the region, specifically in Mexico. And they could partner with Bitso, and they could partner with other players. They've already partnered with one of the largest banks in the world, in Mexico, that it's Banco Azteca. Because, Ricardo Salinas Pliego is basically the Mexican Michael Saylor. This guy loves Bitcoin and just keeps buying Bitcoin, and he's a billionaire. And he has one of the largest banks in the country. So that partnership is going to be really, really interesting. And Yeah, like congrats to Bitso. I get really happy because of this, because when I was there, the business branch was just starting growing, and now it's a key part of their business. So it's also really interesting to see what's going to happen with retail, because competition, like Bitso's product on retail, it's not the best one.
Yeah, yeah. I think we like have spoken off the pod a little bit about kind of the dynamics of Bitso. But hey, clearly it's like working out for them in whatever strategy they're approaching. And I'm also excited to see like more competition into the markets. And whether that's like global players come into the equation and so forth. But yeah, man, up and up for Mexico and remittances and stablecoins. So and the nice
Yeah.
thing about stablecoins and remittances is they're not exactly tied to the conditions of the global crypto markets, right? It's like remittances will
Yeah.
flow always. There's like an interesting dynamic there with like a lot of the deportations now that Trump wants to do and so forth, and like I'm curious to see how remittance flows will decrease or increase as a consequence of this. But I that's like the nice thing about sort of remittances. There's a constant stream of funds coming, and it's not endogenous to the state of crypto markets.
Yeah, definitely. That's another key element on why a crypto startup wants to do remittances. Because, in bull markets, everyone's happy, and in bear markets, everyone's suffering. But with remittances or money flows, we, they're, they don't need to worry about that, right? Perfect. So let's move on to the next news. And Bitget, one of the largest exchanges in the world, they are huge in Asia, and they are investing really, really heavily in Latin America. They just obtained a license in El Salvador, a VASP license, a digital asset service provider, a virtual asset service provider, sorry. And why is this important? Because El Salvador keeps giving these important steps in regulation. It's also the same license that several players in Latin America use for crypto assets. For example, then again, Bitso launched a Web3 wallet, and when you read their terms and conditions, they operate out of a license like this one. So it seems like Bitget is gearing up to attack the market. What's your take on Bitget and their steps they're taking in Latam?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, El Salvador went from being a country that people probably a lot of the people that are operating in the region couldn't even tell you where the country is located. And now it's become this global hub, right, where we've got Google, Bitget, Bitso, all of these massive global players being attracted to El Salvador. So huge win for El Salvador. Bukele's thesis is playing out exactly as it should have. We're going to talk a little bit about El Salvador and sort of other moves that have been unfolding in the country in just a bit. But again, it's just this market is heating up. I'm telling you, like Latin America is going to be one of the hottest markets for global crypto adoption. And again, we're seeing it in Argentina, we're seeing it in El Salvador, we're seeing it in Mexico, and this is why I'm super bullish. Like this podcast, all of the information that we're putting out, all this research, because a lot of folks are trying to understand the market dynamics, and a lot of people are trying to get a sense of where this is heading. I mean, how do you see Bitget sort of trying to engage in the region, and how do you see them affect? I mean, you've worked very closely in El Salvador as well, right? So I'm curious, like, how you interpret this and where you see them being able to take this and next steps.
Um, I met part of the team in Madrid because they were at an event, and I found really interesting that they're a global company that they segmented the market by language. So people addressing the market in Spain are the same people that they are addressing the market in Latin America. And I think that as a first move might be smart, but still the cultural differences are so big that it's important to play out a specific strategy per country. So I love that they are coming, and they are coming with resources and really trying to address the market. Competition is great, so I think it's really important for Bitget entering into I think Mexico. They will be competing with Binance and Bitso, so that's important. It's kind of underwhelming to see that we only have one local player, where in Brazil you have 10 Brazilian exchanges and 10 Brazilian crypto companies. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm just worried that we are getting these big tech feelings of, okay, it's impossible to penetrate the market because these players are too big already.
Yeah, I mean, it's capital begets liquidity. Capital begets capital, and liquidity begets liquidity, right? And so
Exactly.
it's like the more liquid your order books are, the cheaper your take rates are, and the more users will be ultimately drawn there. In theory, right? Because I think a lot of retail doesn't really care about like, hey, are you charging me like 10 basis points or 20 basis points on the trade? But if you're doing, multi-million-dollar transactions, which again I think is like another really really big area, is how do we do cross-border payments between,
Yeah.
say, like Chile and China, and Tether I know is like stepping quite heavily into this area, and a lot of people are already settling in Brazil, for example, with Tether, when they do cross-border sort of large transactions. So again, liquidity, and we'll continue to see these big players trying to sort of like race for liquidity in the region. But ultimately, it's just going to come down to that. So we've got a docket here next, right? Talks about Brazil and how they're looking to sort of expand their offering. So I'll let you take this one away.
Yeah. So Bradesco, that is the third largest asset manager in Brazil, is offering Hashdex's crypto funds and crypto products to their user base. And why is this important? Because, as I said, Bradesco is the third largest asset manager in Brazil. They manage around $180 billion. The largest asset manager is Banco do Brasil and then Itaú. So I think that Brazilians keep pushing these crypto products, and the Hashdex products are really interesting. They're a combination between crypto products, like an ETF of crypto, and um, like debt. It's a debt instrument. And just to remember, Kush, Brazil was one of the first countries to approve an ETF of Bitcoin. I think it was like Brazil and Canada. And maybe nobody cared back then, or the global crypto product or the global crypto community didn't care. But this is just another proof of how Brazil is really advanced in the crypto industry. And at the same time, Brazilian users they now need to report all their crypto holdings to tax authorities. So I think Brazil is in this point where they have really strong pushing forces of how to implement crypto, but that amount of energy pushing the industry, it's inversely proportionate to the amount of energy trying to regulate. And I think that's good. That balance is good. If we only have accelerators, the car crashes, but if only we have brakes, the car doesn't move. So we need a balance between really fast accelerators and regulation strong enough to brake or to make things move at the right speed. So that's the way that I'm seeing Brazil. I don't know. What's your take on this balance between regulation and adoption?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the age-old story that we've been discussing on this podcast for a while, right? Between the acceleration and adoption of these advanced technologies and kind of how they get integrated into everyday lives, and kind of how regulators see them playing out as well, right? So we saw it with Brazil CBDC, and then immediately they were also trying to propose regulation that forbade you from withdrawing your stables into your self-custody wallets. And it's like, okay, cool, like Brazil is very advanced, and then also at the same time they're trying to in theory appropriately regulate this industry. My big concern is, and I agree with like, we've got to have sensible regulation, but the key word there is sensible, because oftentimes this regulation is not sensible, and in fact it's just like, crypto is used for money laundering. Oh, okay, cool, like we're gonna ban crypto entirely, right? Or crypto is used for just these very, very brutish and unsophisticated takes on how crypto works, what is the nuance between like one asset and another, and so forth. So it just calls for the need for like more education at the regulatory level, and making sure that our regulators, as they look towards working with different global companies, institutions, they have proper guidance, right? Because otherwise, as we've discussed previously in the podcast, like pulling in regulation into Latin America is a slow process. Undoing that regulation is even more challenging, right? And so we have to make sure as like these building blocks fall into place, that they're done appropriately, they're done with good measure, and that we have a really clear sense of, okay, why this is happening, how this benefits end users as well. And again, it's just positive news that we oftentimes follow what our big brothers in the North, the United States, does when it comes to regulation as well. So as we see more pro-crypto regulation sweep in the US, a lot of that will cascade down towards the Americas as well, which I'm certainly looking forward to.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how each country has a different approach. Mexico basically ignores crypto regulation with the fintech law that they created a couple of years ago. Brazil seem a lot more forward driven. Argentina is in the extreme of let's make everything compete. And if Bitcoin wins, Bitcoin will win. If the Argentina peso wins, it'll win. It's super interesting to see this like Cambrian explosion of different approaches of regulation products and different ways of building crypto in the region. And one thing that I found really interesting, I was gonna leave this news out of this week's episode, but you brought it in. The news that right now you can users in Colombia can access Blackrock's ETFs through traditional Colombian entities, and I think that why I think it's really interesting this because I just came to the realization that maybe the best way to export Bitcoin is through BlackRock's ETFs in regions that are not the US. I'd love to get what you think about this and why do you think it's important to include this news?
Yeah, so I think the wider story here, and I know you had sort of like different takes on this, and a lot of people are really not very excited by IBIT and what they're doing. Without a question of a doubt, BlackRock has done a really, really great job of bringing Bitcoin to more people through their ETF products. Okay, a lot of people are going to say, not your keys, not your crypto, right? In fact, a lot of the Bitcoin is actually custodied through Coinbase and other custodians through a lot of these ETF products. However, what we are doing is we're giving people exposure to an asset class, right? And for some people, maybe signing up to Binance or Bybit or any other trading platform just isn't feasible for them. Or maybe it's too complex, or they're scared that they're going to get locked out of their accounts. Whatever the case may be, you already are giving an entirely new pool of investors access to exposure to crypto, and specifically Bitcoin through this ETF product. One thing that I'm particularly excited by, and this is another opportunity here that I think is really, really important for Latin America, is being able to tap into the institutional capital that we have in the region. So you mentioned, for example, is we've got Brazil's third largest bank looking to add crypto exposure, right, through their different products. We've got other institutions as well throughout the region that are looking towards this and activating basically like on the order of hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of capital, and being able to bring that capital into crypto is going to be huge. And trust me, like the first step is the ETF products. Then it's going to be, oh, maybe I should just hold the Bitcoin. And then maybe it's like, hey, maybe I should hold ETH. Oh, I can borrow stablecoins against my Ether on Aave, for example, or on MakerDAO, Sky as it's called now. So I think this is just like the first step in many for a lot of folks, right? So I think this is like net good ultimately, but I know you kind of felt a little bit reluctant about the news and to some extent left it out intentionally, but I'm curious to see like why you see this not being like as big of a deal as perhaps I see it.
Yeah, it's not about IBIT and bullish IBIT. It's about stock exchanges in Latin America. They do not operate a lot of money, or they don't have significant volumes. But when I see it in the other way with your take, I think that having the option, it's important because there's a lot of capital flowing between local stock exchanges in the region and global players. And if with global players we have this option of enabling them buying Bitcoin, that's really important because it's a thing about optionality. If you go to the US and you want to buy tortillas and there are no tortillas, you buy other stuff, right? So people need to have their capacity, their ability to buy Bitcoin should be matched with the offering of buying Bitcoin. So something of supply and demand. So yeah, after your analysis, I find it interesting having IBIT in the Colombian stock exchange. I'd love to see the volumes in a couple of months because maybe if you just have them and no one's buying them, it's just like hollow news, right? But yeah, I think that's what I think. And Kush, the final news on this week's Frontera, I want you to tell us about it because you are really interested in El Salvador and the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah, I've been going to El Salvador for like 20 years now, and it's been so fun to see El Salvador just like grow and develop and mature since I first went as a kid, right? And why again I'm super bullish, right? I'm from Central America originally, right? And so I've seen just so many countries in Central America really fall behind when it comes to this like innovation gap and so forth. And so what's really exciting about El Salvador is that they are the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. Here's the story. The IMF basically came in and gave El Salvador a $1.4 billion loan. And in the loan agreement, they stipulated that El Salvador had to do three key things. One, people could no longer pay taxes in crypto. Two, they either had to sell or wind down the Chivo wallet, which is sort of this big wallet. There's a big controversy behind the wallet there as well. And the third point is that they could no longer force businesses to accept crypto. So by law, if you are a business in El Salvador, you are required to accept Bitcoin, right? So if you go into Starbucks and McDonald's or any big supermarket, the smaller stores don't generally accept Bitcoin unless you're in like Tunco, El Sonte, which are like labeled as Bitcoin Beach. And the really interesting part of the story here is the fact that the IMF cares so much about Bitcoin and is so worried about Bitcoin that they literally had to tell El Salvador, like, hey, you can no longer kind of do these three things, which frankly are like pretty minor. I think it's like probably good that Chivo is being wound down. Again, big controversy there behind the way the wallet was developed and the company that was doing it. And the more plurality that we have in Bitcoin wallets, I think the better, and the more diverse that people are, not just relying on a single wallet, will be great. And the really interesting part here is like El Salvador turned around and bought like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin pretty much like the next day. They buy Bitcoin every day, but they increase their Bitcoin purchases right after signing this agreement as well, which I think is just hilarious and just a total sort of, to some extent, I guess, way of showing that, hey, yes, we're conceding to this, and like this loan is important for our country. At the same time, we are no less bullish on Bitcoin after signing this agreement.
I think that this fits into the classical political theory of going to an extreme and then falling into the center. Because if El Salvador would only have reserves in Bitcoin and they afterwards they ask for a loan, maybe the IMF would tell them, okay, you need to sell your reserves of Bitcoin, right? So that would be a net loss. But they were so deep headed into crypto adoption with the Chivo wallet and making Bitcoin legal tender and paying taxes and then the reserves that they can let go with those things that are not that really important, or that they are important, but it's more important to have Bitcoin in their balance sheet. So I can imagine the negotiations of the International Monetary Fund going with El Salvador, telling them, hey, you need to basically detach from Bitcoin. And they saying, we're not doing that. Our trading cards are these three things, and we keep our balances in Bitcoin. Okay, perfect. Right? So it's like classical negotiation strategy.
Yeah, I'm sure the negotiations didn't start there, right? I mean, El Salvador holds nearly 6,000 Bitcoins worth, $570 million plus dollars. They're actually up 112% on those buys. And so I'm sure the negotiation started in a much more nefarious state. But yeah, I mean, I just love the fact that basically like shortly after this agreement was signed, El Salvador just turns around. Yeah, they bought $1 million worth of Bitcoin on December 20th and then again on December 22nd as well, right? So they're just ramping up their purchases of Bitcoin. This is overall a net good for the people of El Salvador, right? They no longer, again, what's the alternative? Are you going to buy gold? Are you going to buy like T-bills, right? Nothing will return the returns and the risk-adjusted returns than what Bitcoin will offer these folks. So again, great move on El Salvador. I'm happy they're able to like tread the line here. I think these three like conditions that the IMF set for them pretty much like doesn't really have a huge impact on the country. And yeah, keep rocking it, Bukele.
Yeah, I'd love to have Bukele someday.
I think that can be our goal for this podcast, man. I see that not being like far off dream for us. So I think maybe like in a few episodes time we'll be able to get him on the pod.
We need to bring Vitalik, Bukele, and builders in Latin America.
There we go. The three B's/V.
Yeah. BVB. Perfect. Man, the next Frontera is gonna be in 2025. So I think that these first episodes were the pilot of what we're building. There's a lot of things coming for us. What are you gonna do in New Year's Eve?
Yeah, I'm gonna go spend some time with friends. Really nice moment to just unplug, go surfing with a group of friends, and that'll be it. But man, 2025 is gonna be absolutely massive. Like I think everyone's so bullish on 2025. I'm bullish on 2025 in Latin America specifically. Like I'm telling you, it's gonna be a big year for the region. And I'm so glad that we've got the great people of Espacio Crypto, Bando, our team, and other just like aligned folks who are just like riding the wave and who have been here for a super long time. And I just excited to keep building alongside you all and kind of really reap the fruits of our labor that we've been sowing over the course of the last few years as well. How about you? What are you up to, and what are you looking forward to next year?
Oof, I'm really bullish on next year. Everything that we're building at Bando, I'm really excited. We are getting some like really big partnership announcements soon, so it's gonna be exciting. And with Espacio Crypto and Frontera, I'm also really excited. We are working to become the largest media company in Spanish, in crypto, obviously. And I think that we have a really good shot of doing that. With your support and everything that we're building, really bullish. I just want to let more people around the crypto industry understand what's happening in our region, helping them getting up to speed, deploying products, hiring developers, bringing in users. So that's the objective, and making crypto spendable with Bando. That I think that's a big challenge now, and that's it. I'm gonna spend New Year's Eve with my family, something really chill, I think. I need to find an apartment now that I've moved back to Mexico. I'm actually just about to leave to an appointment to visit a new apartment that I might rent. So whenever you're in Mexico, you should visit, man.
Awesome, man. No, I'm definitely come by. We've talked about setting up a little like crypto sort of set of houses right throughout Latin America. So Mexico, Buenos Aires, Rio, and other cities. So we'll definitely make that happen, man. But no, it's been a great year. I really hope that all the listeners of the Frontera podcast have enjoyed this. I think the most important thing is like keep showing up, keep learning, ask questions, and looking forward to seeing you all next year.
Amazing, perfect. So take care. Have a good New Year's Eve and see you around. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.